Welcome, everyone, to Squid and Ultimate Leaf Fan Show. I'm Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Leafs fan. Joining me, as always, my winger, Ricky Squid Vibe. Squid, the free agency market took an interesting turn since we last spoke, with Minnesota buying out Ryan Suter and Zach Parise.
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, they're two good players. I mean, they're getting up there in age. There's no question about that. But, and they're not going to command the type of money. I mean, those are two guys that might play for, 1.5, 2 million a year for another 3 or 4 years if they can. So, signing Suter especially would probably be a pretty smart thing to do if you could get them for $2 or $3 million because they are getting paid quite a bit in their buyout and they've made a ton already.
Boy, I would hope you'd try and get him a lot cheaper now. Now, there may be a little bit of a bidding war for him. I would suggest it because he played top 4 minutes with Minnesota on a pretty good team. But, the thinking is that, if you're going to get both of them, I would say, obviously, for the Leafs, this is somebody they should be targeting for sure. I would say if you can get him for the right price. I suspect there's going to be some competition for a guy like this, especially after people have seen what Weber at 35, whereas Suter's at 36, has done for Montreal. Everything being equal, man, oh man, he's going to get some interest. But I'm only thinking that maybe you go for them both because these two appear to be joined at the hip. So if you bring Parise and you bring him in on a minimum contract, at least you got him playing with his buddy, and it only costs you $800,000.
Yeah, the only problem is they're both American-born players. They're both, I think, from Minnesota. It's not like, okay, we want to go to Toronto because that's where we're from. We're from Ontario, and we want to go back home. And, it's not one of those scenarios. So getting those two guys to come to Toronto or somewhere else, perhaps in Canada, might be a little bit more difficult, considering they're Americans and, they've played their whole careers in the U.S. And, let's face it, the taxes and the cost of living is a lot cheaper down there. So that might be a tough chore.
Well, I mean, it depends how they're accounted. Like if they got a good account, don't forget their salaries are now spread out over 8 years, I believe, on the cap buy or the buyout. And they hit, let's go back to the process of this. I mean, the thinking is, these guys are going to cost you that kind of money over the first 2 years. You spread it out over the next 8. You're going to get hit a year out, but it's freeing up some room. And where I'm going with this is a conversation Leafs could be having with 91 in a year or two, in a couple of years. And take note of this. This was a very tough decision day. Now, apparently Suter hung up on Kieran when he called him. The conversation was a little friendlier with Parise, but these guys are still going to get paid. The way they're everything is structured, that they could probably play up here. And if they're only playing up here for the minimum, but are they going to come? But the lure would be playing for a contender.
Yeah, I can understand that. And if they think Toronto is a team that, with them being added to the roster, is going to get them over the hump and give them an opportunity to win, then, the possibility of them coming for, $1 million or less is probably pretty good if they think that's a team that, they could help get over the hump. But there's a lot of other teams in that type of situation. You look at Carolina, you look at Florida, you look at Vegas, you look at, Colorado. There's so many teams that, if they could get those two guys for under $1 million, could easily, make their team that much better and get them over the hump.
I'm with you.
There's going to be a lot of competition for those two guys, I would imagine, regardless of their age.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And that's what I'm saying. If you got to package them both together, even though Parise, I would say, listen, he was playing fourth line minutes. He was a healthy scratch, taken off the power play, all that. His time has come and gone, basically. So, you've got a little bit left. Suter, there's something left in that engine. So my whole point, as I said before, is to try to track both of them. Toronto's a position that can do that, but a lot of other teams are in that same position as well. And you're right. Carolina is going to lose probably Doug Hamilton. They're going to have hole to fill there. So they're going to be, listen, there's going to be no shortages of phone calls to both agents. I can tell you that, but particularly Suiters.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if the phone doesn't start ringing off the hook. like you say, especially for Suter. I mean, regardless of whether he's 37 years old or not, I mean, the guy played very, very well. He played, like you say, played top 4 minutes, and that team was a pretty strong hockey team. So I'm sure there's a lot of teams in the league that would love to have him on the blue line.
Well, I mean, and the whole purpose of going on about this a little bit is that we'd love to have, particularly Suter in the Toronto lineup, obviously next year if they could get him for the right price. But this could be the start of a very eventful offseason. As you pointed out many times in our talks, one we may never see again, or we haven't seen before. Let's put it there. We could see it again. But as you pointed out, Squid, some big shoes to drop throughout the league, particularly probably during the free agency period, all predicated on a flat cap that we're seeing for at least the next 2 years. This could be the start of right here with these two.
It could be, and it's going to be. And personally, I really think there's going to be a lot of deals made at the expansion draft. I really do. I mean, teams are going to be trying to unload a little bit of cap space. Okay, if you take this guy, we'll throw this in or a draft pick in, and whatever. So I think at the expansion draft there's going to be a lot of moves made, and then I think at the regular draft there's going to be a lot of moves made because of free agency shortly following the draft. So, teams are going to be trying to put themselves in a position where they can either sign a free agent or they can sign their own free agent and keep them on their hockey club.
Well, I mean, Minnesota's an example. This frees up 2 spots on the roster, too, that they can fill with other players they won't lose in the expansion draft. They got those 2 young kids they've got to sign themselves, but they just freed up $26 million basically in total with these guys in the whole cap number they have going into this year's agency and free agency. So they've got some, but they have some guys to sign. But again, as we've talked about, does this set the stage for term is king and upfront cash maybe less? As we saw Boston today extend one of their defensemen 6 years. It's funny because Toronto's the poster child of what happens when it doesn't work. Big money to the upfront stars. But let's be fair here. No one saw a 3-year flat cap coming at $81.5 million a couple of years ago when this all took place. But the conventional wisdom was probably going to inch closer to $90 million the cap as opposed to where it is now, especially with all these new TV contracts coming in, or which were up for renewal, and everybody thought they were going up, they weren't going down. But having said that, Minnesota can be the flip side of the poster child for aggressively freeing up short-term relief with some cap hangover down the road. So this could be the start of a little bit more to come as we move forward in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it could be very well. I mean, and don't be shocked if you see a few other teams in the league start shedding some older guys and buying them out of, lucrative contracts in order to free up some cap space. And, I mean, I think it's going to happen because they're looking at it probably from a standpoint that, okay, we're not going to get hurt for the next couple of years. It's going to affect us down the road when maybe the cap is a little bit higher and we can handle that extra, money back in a few years. But right now it's not going to hurt us. So let's buy them out. Let's open up some room, get those young guys signed that had great years, and then move on. And then, when it does start affecting us, when we have to, put them on our cap or whatever you want to call it, then, it might be at 90 million and it's not going to hurt us.
So, I mean, we're going to be watching out with interest over the next few weeks. I would say there'll be a few more of these I think we see in the net, but the days are ticking away. So, we mentioned Dean Chenoweth the other night as the newest addition behind the Leafs bench. He comes with a very strong resume, certainly more than qualified. He's got head coaching, written all over him. His strength is defense and power penalty kill, 2 definite areas of concern for the blue and white. I'd like to take this on a different spin, though, because we've seen this before. We brought in specialists and has worked in OFL. I'd like to maybe give listeners a little insight of actually how you get picked as an assistant or even as a coach by management, what it is, because let's face it, you've been through a few times, but let's face it. I mean, I get the idea of facts over philosophy, systems, personnel will be discussed. And as we've heard on our podcast a few times, most coaches have the same X's and O's, are very similar. But aside from all of that, When you were hired in South Carolina, as an example, what did the owner say to you to bring you into the fold or ask you?
Well, I mean, a lot of questions. I mean, a lot related to hockey, like, what are you going to do? How are you going to build this team? It's an expansion team. When
Mhm.
I took over the first year, and it's like, we want to sell tickets, and how are you going to sell tickets for us? So it was a little bit different there. Whereas, like, when I was uh, interviewed by Calgary for their American League job
Mhm.
5 years later, that was a little different because that was about uh, getting the players from the American League to the National League, and how are you going to do that? What is your philosophy on building these guys up and getting them, ready for the National Hockey League and developing them to the point where they can play in Calgary? And so it was a much different interview than the first one, because basically the first one was about building a team that's going to put people in the building. And it was a non-traditional hockey market. So most people in Charleston, South Carolina knew nothing about
Yeah.
hockey. In fact, they used to, when the puck was iced, they used to, over the loudspeaker, would tell the fans exactly why the whistle was blown and what icing is or what offside is. And so they had to kind of educate them on the game. But Calgary was a whole different animal because it was all about developing the players, and how are we going to do this and how are you going to do this? What is your philosophy on coaching? And it's pretty simple. I mean, my biggest asset, I believe, was communication. The fact that I know how to talk to the players
Mhm.
and get the most out of them, and that's what I did in South Carolina. And I think that was the biggest thing. I think that's what got me the job, really, more than anything else, was the fact that I had good communication skills, which is very, very important for younger players as well.
Now, let's go to Calgary. Now, Al Coates was the GM at the time who interviewed
Yep.
you. Now, was
Hmm.
Brian Sutter was the head coach? Was
Yep.
he a part of the talks at some point also?
Who's that?
Brian
Sorry.
Sutter, who was coaching.
No, he was not part of the interview at all. It was Al Coates and Nick Polano, who was the assistant GM, and
Yep.
of course my boss in St. John. Those are the two guys that talked to me, and I probably talked to Al probably, I want to say, 3, 4 times, and Nick Polano, I probably only spoke with him once, I think. So Al was really making the decision, and but it was a great process. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking to them, giving them
Well,
my
let me
philosophies,
stop you
and
right there. What did you ask them going in when you got comfortable and did you sense all of a sudden that this was going well? So you started feeling, okay, what's in this? Like, what are you going to give to me? Or like, what's coming my way? Like, you must have had some questions from them.
well, I wanted pretty good money, and
Well,
they
besides the
gave it to
money.
me.
Yeah. Well,
So,
besides
so
that.
that was the key.
Yeah.
That was the first part. But
Yeah. Besides that.
um, you know what? It actually didn't go both ways. I'll be quite honest with you,
Hmm.
Mike. I wanted to know what they expected of me, and
Yeah.
okay, how's our relationship going to be? Like, when are you going to call down and you're going to ask me who we need a right winger? Who's the best right winger right now? And then you're going to call that player up. Well, I was there 2 years, and in 2 years they called up one player that I recommended. Marty St. Louis was recommended pretty much anytime they needed a forward because he was by far our best player and maybe the best player in the American Hockey League at that time. But I mean, it was really disappointing for me because I lived with these guys every day. I was on the ice with them every day, on the bus,
Yep.
talking to them all the
Yep.
time. And if anybody knows if they're ready or not, it's the guy that's with them every day. And the only guy that they called up in 2 years, and it was probably with about 3 months left, or maybe a little bit more in the second year, and it was Chris Clark. And he wasn't ready the first year. Second year, he really came along and really developed really strongly. And then they asked about a right winger. I said, Chris Clark, I think he's ready. You should give him a shot. They called him up. He never played in the American League again after that. So, but other than that, that was the most disappointing part of it all, was the fact that, you know, I wasn't part of the decisions whenever they wanted to call someone up. It was like, you know, I'd say, well, you should call this guy up. And the next day I'd come in and they'd be packing someone else's bag. And I'd go, what's going on? Trainer would say, well, he just got called up. And I'd be like, oh, God, really? Like, that's not the guy that I recommended. But so again, one guy in 2 years was the guy that I said should be called up. And that was only once. And so that was probably the most disappointing part of it for me anyway.
Well, that's the whole thing. And today, now at that time, were they using sort of a system where the big team used the same system as the American Hockey League team, so the transition would be almost seamless? So the player was moved up to the bigger club, or were you guys sort of on your own?
A little bit of both. You know, I sat down with Brian before the season at training camp, and kind of we went over how he wanted to play. And, you know, I said, okay, that works. I mean, we'll play pretty much the same system as you play. It might be a little bit different. I might throw a few little wrinkles in there that might not be exactly the way your team plays, you know, but by and large, we'll try to follow what you do so that the players, when they do get called up, it's not a big learning curve for them. That's
the whole point. I mean, and that's, you can see the successful teams, that's what they do. And you do have to work hand in hand. So just because you're bringing in where I'm going with this, but just because you're bringing a qualified coach doesn't mean it's always going to work if the coach isn't cooperative with the assistant or the guy working with them in the American Hockey League. And you're proof of the pudding of that with the experience you went through. Well, Squid, it's a subject I'd love to continue. It fascinates me, and I know people have sent me notes about it in the past that wanted to know more about your coaching and how that all kind of unraveled. So something we'll talk about down the road. But that clock is sending us nasty.
Mike, unfortunately, it did unravel too.
Yeah, well, you know, it's.
I mean, I had 2 decent years in St. John. We had some good players, and I remember when Al Coates and Nick Plano got fired, and we had meetings in Calgary. Lanny was in on those meetings. Todd Button, Craig's brother, who was scouts for Calgary, and then the head scout, I forget his name, and the president at the time, King, I believe was his last name. And we went over everything, and, you know, on the board they had the list of the players, and they had St. Louis right at the bottom, and I couldn't understand it. And Todd Button was adamant that he couldn't play in the National Hockey League. And I said, you got to be kidding me, really? And I said, how many times have you seen him play? And he said, well, it doesn't matter. He can't play. And I said, no, hold on. How many times have you watched him play? He said, I don't know, 6, 7. I said, oh, okay. Well, I see him every day. I see him every day in practice, how hard he works. And I'll tell you what, if you don't give him an opportunity and play him with 2 decent players, because if he gets that opportunity, he's going to be a 30-goal, 30-assist player in the National Hockey League. I never thought that perhaps he was going to be in the Hall of Fame and win a scoring championship and everything else. But I knew he was going to be a good player. And so anyway, it all came crashing down. And when Todd's brother, Craig, came in, and I was replaced in July, unfortunately, and there weren't a whole lot of jobs available at that point in time. So that was kind of frustrating. Well,
except your golf game got better. So there's at the end of the tunnel, you got a good golf game now. So anyway, we are fighting the clock as always, Squid. We do want to continue this discussion down the road at some points. We will continue to talk about the Leafs. We'll talk a little more about free agency when we meet again on Monday. But, you know, as always, talking about the Leafs, it's always centers on hope, dreams, fantasy, all concerning what the future may hold. So keep them at that theme. Let's keep today's message really simple. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm always ready, Mike.
I know that. I know it's great. Here we go. Dreams don't work unless you take action.
Mm-hmm.
And with free agency coming up, we can only dream. So on that note, folks, I want to thank everybody for listening. We'll be back Monday, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget to tune in to this week's podcast featuring recently crowned head coach of the ECHL Kelly Cup champion Fort Wayne Comets, Ben Boudreau. If the name sounds familiar, he is the son of longtime NHL head coach and player Bruce Boudreau, who's also been on the show. So we've had the father and son tandem on here. So listen up to that. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you on Monday.